With our tongs complete, it's time to address ourselves to making the knife. I'm just going to go ahead and mark this at the halfway point. It's 6 inches long, so I'm going to mark it at 3 inches. 3 inches will turn into the handle, 3 inches will turn into the blade. I'm just going to start by marking this cold, then I'll be able to find my mark again when it's hot. I just want to knock off the little sharp edge that results from butchering it, just to make sure it doesn't become a cold shut later. Next, I'll clean that transition up a little bit so I don't have to come back to it after the blade is forged. But we will forge the blade before we finish the handle. That way we can hold on to it with just this one pair of tongs. The next thing this will need is a little bit of a point. You can forge that in, but I like to cut it off at about 45 degrees from the back side and then push the point over to the back. And that just makes it go a little bit quicker and guarantees you're not going to get a cold shut along the cutting edge. There again, filing that burr off will help keep things clean in the long run. I want to thin this out as it gets closer to the tip, often referred to as a distal taper, so I'll start doing that over the horn. Next, let's put a little bit of a bend towards the cutting edge, because as we draw that out, it's going to want to bend back the other direction. Now it's time to draw out the cutting edge. You want to work so that your hammer is not striking the edge of your anvil. Sometimes an anvil block is useful for this. And you want to work equally from both sides so that you don't build up any stress in the blade that might cause warping later. You can see how the blade starts to straighten out as you thin that edge. You also want to keep the spine of the blade up off the anvil to match the angle you're trying to forge, so that you're not just pushing it back and forth from side to side. There is a little low spot on the spine of the knife right here. I think that's a divot from doing the back bend of the knife. So I want to file that out before we go any further. While I'm at it, let's go ahead and clean up the profile of the blade just because it's easy to work on right now. Now, I would absolutely do this on a belt grinder normally. I just want to show you that you don't have to have all that fancy equipment. Forge, hammer, anvil, vise, and a few files can make a pretty good knife. So with the profile for our knife all filed in, it's time to go back to the forge, clean up the handle a little bit, shape it the way we want, and then put a curl in it. Putting a curl in this that will serve as a guard, and to start that I'm bending it away from the cutting edge. By the way, at this point I am at about 9 inches of length through here. A lot of people will put a twist in the handle section. If you want to do that, I would do that before I do anything else to this. But personally, I think they look good without the twist. Before hardening and tempering, I want to do a first filing of the blade to just establish the bevels and get them close to what I want. It's going to be a lot harder to file after it's been hardened and tempered. For that matter, the scale is pretty darn tough to start with. It's harder than your files are, but you can knock it off with a file. So if you've got nice new files, you don't want to damage them, find an old one. This is one I've been using for about 20 years on hot material over by the forge. It's completely wore out. It hardly has any grip left on it at all. But for knocking the scale off, it's going to work just fine. I like to hold things like this in this piece of angle iron. That gives me a nice surface I can work on. And with a little perseverance, you'll get through all the scale, and then you can worry about filing it to look just the way you want it to. My intent with this video is to show you that you can do all this by hand. This is certainly not the fastest, most efficient way to do this. Any kind of power tools you have are going to make your life easier. Whether that's a little 6-inch bench grinder with hard wheels on it, an angle grinder with a flap disc, even a woodworker's palm sander is going to make this process go a little bit faster. So use what you have, use what you're comfortable with. Now that most of the scale's off, I'm going to switch to a better file. For hardening and tempering, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the forge just to keep things as simple as possible. You do have to be prepared for the whole process at this point though. This is W1 steel or water hardening steel. It quenches in water, so I have a bucket of water ready to go. I have a big chunk of steel that I'm going to heat up before I get the knife ready to quench, and this is what I'm going to use for tempering. I'm going to get this red hot and use it as the heat source for tempering. That should give us a nice controlled temper. And I have a little piece of kind of a glazed over fire brick, something that I can abrade the knife with and get through the scale from hardening so that I can see the temper colors run. We'll judge the tempering temperature by eye based on the colors. I'm going to go for kind of a bronze into the purple range, and that should make a nice durable knife. Okay. I'm going to real quick shine up the bevel. It's kind of a smooth glazed over fire brick that I'm hoping doesn't leave real deep scratches, just takes the scale off. I'm going to put this on there. Let's see if you can see the colors run here or not. I do want this section here to get hot just in case it cooled off too fast in the quench, again to keep it from being stressed. And the tip usually heats up fast, so I'm going to start with it off the edge and work my way back that direction if I need to. You can also lay it flat this way and maybe work from both sides. And it's starting to turn blue there. It's a little hotter than I would like. I'm going to quench it again and see if I've got enough heat to do a double temper. Tempering this way will certainly get the job done, but it is not as accurate as using an oven. Even the cheap old toaster oven I keep in the shop will give you a much more even temper. This does have the advantage though of leaving the back of the knife a little bit softer, and that makes for a tougher knife in the long run. Quenching should get rid of most of the scale. It just blows off in the quench. But now the blade is harder, so it's still going to be tough to file. But this is a point where you want to go with a very nice file. If you got a brand new one that you've been waiting for an excuse to use, this may be it. It's going to make your life a lot easier, and you'll do a better job because of it. It's also less likely to have things snagging the teeth of the file, which also brings up the point, keep a file card around, clean your files if you start to see scratches so you don't have little chips in the file that leave scratches in your blade. Ultimately, hand sanding is going to be the way to finish this. Now I probably have about a half an hour filing this with a new file, and unfortunately this file is already showing signs of wear, so I'm not going to do more than 1 or 2 knives with this file before it becomes an old worn out file, and maybe it becomes a knife itself. That's one of the downsides of using files to do all this. They wear out, you end up with a lot of worn out files, and you spend a lot of money on files. In the long run, if you're going to make a whole lot of knives, you're probably going to want a belt grinder or at least some sort of power tools, even if that's just an angle grinder with an assortment of flap discs. But now it's on to hand sanding, and I'm going to try and support that in this wood block here. Flared out the finger bow on this handle. It's a little bit hard to clamp up, but I think I can do it. And if I can get that clamped in there, that I can work lengthwise, and I think that will leave a better scratch pattern if we don't get all the scratches out or if we don't go up to a mirror finish, which I really doubt I'm going to do. I think we got a couple hours in hand sanding to look forward to. Now, if you're a full-time knife maker that does this by hand, my guess is you've got better ways of holding this. I'd love to hear about it down there in the comments section. I'm going to start off with some 80 grit abrasive, and I'm just going to lay that on the back of the file to have a nice flat surface to work with. Well, it looks like 320 is the finest grit I have in these sanding strips. You can buy this stuff all the way up into the thousands of grits, maybe even 2,000 or 3,000 grit. Just depends on how much work you want to put into it and how fine a finish you want. Personally, I'm going to leave it at 320 and just finish it off with a little bit of Scotch-Brite. And I think that will be fine for this project. But if you want a mirror polish, that's up to you. Well, that gives us a nice functional little knife. I want to thank Ken's Custom Iron for sending their Viking Knife kit out. So whether you call it a Viking knife, Blacksmith's knife, or whatever you want to call it, it's a handy little project and it's a good introduction to knife making. You don't need all the power tools you see in a lot of knife making videos, but admittedly, in the time it took me to hand file and hand sand this, I probably could have forged rough ground and had ready to harden and temper 3 or 4 more knives just like this. So in future videos, we're probably going to go back to the belt grinder. Hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, but stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video. And no, this block will not heat the anvil up enough to change the temper on the anvil.